The alien patrol craft descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull gleaming silver against the dawn sky. Lieutenant Sarah pressed herself against the rough bark of an ancient oak tree, watching through her binoculars as the vessel settled into the clearing where her military camp had stood just 3 days ago. They had been thorough in their sweep of the Pacific Northwest, systematically dismantling every human settlement they encountered. Sarah's fingers traced the empty holster at her hip, a bitter reminder of the aliens' first decree after their arrival. Every weapon, from military-grade assault rifles to kitchen knives, had been confiscated with ruthless efficiency. The claim they were establishing a peaceful occupation zone for humanity's own protection. Sarah knew better. She had seen what happened to the resistance fighters in Seattle when they tried to oppose the invaders with improvised weapons. The alien energy weapons had reduced them to ash in seconds. The forest around her remained silent except for the distant hum of machinery. Sarah had been one of only 12 soldiers to escape when the aliens overran Fort Harrison. Now, after 3 days of careful observation, she suspected she might be the only one left alive in this sector. The others had either been captured or killed trying to reach the supposed safe zones the aliens had established in major cities. A twig snapped somewhere behind her, and Sarah spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm that was no longer there. Through the underbrush, she caught a glimpse of movement, not the metallic gleam of armor, but the earth-toned fabric of civilian clothing. A young woman emerged from behind a cluster of ferns, her face streaked with dirt, and her eyes wide with the same haunted look Sarah had seen in every human survivor she'd encountered. "Don't move," the woman whispered urgently, pointing toward the clearing. "They've got sensors, heat, motion, electromagnetic signatures. They can detect anything metal from half a mile away." Sarah nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in the stranger's words. The technology was far beyond anything humanity had developed, but it also revealed their assumptions about how warfare should be conducted. They expected resistance to come in the form of conventional weapons, organized military units, and electronic communications. They weren't prepared for humans who could adapt to older, more primitive methods of combat. "I'm Sarah," she said quietly, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "Maya," the other woman replied. "I was a park ranger here before." She gestured vaguely at the alien ship in the distance. "I know these woods better than anyone, every trail, every creek, every cave. The aliens stick to their ships and the main roads. They don't like the forest." Sarah studied Maya's face, nodding the intelligence behind the fear. This wasn't just another terrified civilian. This was someone who understood the terrain, who had already been thinking tactically about how to survive in this new reality. "You've been watching them too," Sarah observed. Maya nodded grimly. "For 3 days now. They're systematic, but they're also predictable. They send out patrols every 6 hours, always following the same routes. They scan for metal and energy signatures, but they don't seem to pay much attention to biological markers unless they're moving fast or in large groups." The alien ship's engines cycled up, and both women instinctively crouched lower as the craft lifted off, heading toward what had once been the town of. Sarah watched it disappear beyond the tree line, then turned back to Maya. "You said they don't like the forest. What did you mean?" "Their equipment doesn't work as well here," Maya explained, leading Sarah deeper into the woods, away from the clearing. "The trees interfere with their sensors, and their hover vehicles can't maneuver effectively between the trunks. Plus, I think they're just uncomfortable here. They're used to sterile environments, controlled spaces. The unpredictability of nature seems to make them nervous." As they walked, Sarah's military mind began to process the tactical implications of what Maya was telling her. The aliens had superior technology and firepower, but they also had weaknesses. They relied too heavily on their sensors, and they preferred to fight on their own terms. In the dense forest, many of their advantages would be negated. They stopped beside a small creek where Maya knelt and cupped the clear water in her hands. "There's something else," she said, her voice even quieter now. "I found one of their patrol sites yesterday. They left behind some equipment, nothing that works anymore, but I could see how it was put together. Their technology isn't magic, Sarah. It's just very advanced engineering. And engineering can be understood, even improved upon if you're creative enough." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time since the invasion began. She had spent her entire military career studying asymmetric warfare, learning how smaller, less equipped forces could defeat larger, more advanced enemies. The key was always the same. You had to change the rules of engagement. You had to make the enemy fight your war instead of their war. "What are you thinking?" Maya asked, sensing the shift in Sarah's demeanor. "I'm thinking that they made a mistake when they took our weapons," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the forest around them with new purpose. "They assumed that without guns and bombs, we'd be helpless. But humans have been making weapons for thousands of years before we invented gunpowder. We know how to work with wood, stone, bone, and metal we can salvage or forge ourselves." Maya's eyes lit up with understanding. "You want to fight back?" "I want to show them that confiscating our weapons didn't make us helpless," Sarah said firmly. "It just forced us to get creative. These woods are full of everything we need to make traditional weapons: knives, spears, bows, traps. And if we're smart about it, we can create a kill zone that they'll never see coming." The two women looked at each other for a long moment, both understanding the enormous risk they were contemplating. They had demonstrated their willingness to eliminate any human resistance with extreme prejudice. But they had also shown their arrogance, their assumption that primitive humans could never pose a real threat to their advanced civilization. "Where do we start?" Maya asked. Sarah smiled grimly. "First, we need to understand exactly how their patrols work. Then we need to find a defensible position with multiple escape routes. And then," she picked up a fallen branch, testing its weight and flexibility, "then we start making weapons the old-fashioned way." As the sun climbed higher through the forest canopy, the two women began to plan their resistance. Neither of them knew if their efforts would make any real difference in the larger war, but they understood something that they had failed to grasp. Humans had never needed superior technology to be dangerous. They just needed determination, creativity, and the will to adapt. The forest around them seemed to whisper with possibilities, every tree a potential source of arrows, every stone a possible blade, every stream a natural barrier that could be turned to their advantage. The aliens had taken their weapons, but they couldn't take their knowledge, their ingenuity, or their refusal to surrender. Sarah looked up at the alien ship passing overhead in the distance, its hull gleaming arrogantly in the morning sun. Soon, she promised silently, the hunters would become the hunted. They were about to learn why humanity had survived and thrived on Earth before they ever reached for the stars. The resistance was about to begin, and it would be fought with weapons as the abandoned ranger station sat hidden in a grove of towering firs, its weathered wooden walls barely visible through the thick undergrowth. Maya had led Sarah here after 2 days of careful observation and planning, using game trails and creek beds to avoid the patrol routes they had mapped out. The station's solar panels had been destroyed in the initial invasion bombardment, but the building itself remained structurally sound, and more importantly, completely invisible from the air. Sarah ran her hands along the workbench in the station's maintenance shed, her fingers tracing the outlines of tools that had been designed for trail maintenance, but could serve far more deadly purposes. Hammers, chisels, files, and grinding wheels, everything needed to transform raw materials into weapons. The sensors that detected manufactured metals wouldn't register these simple tools as threats, especially when they weren't being actively powered. "The creek here has iron deposits," Maya explained, pointing to a geological survey map pinned to the wall. "Native Americans used to mine it for arrowheads and knife blades. There's also a natural coal seam about half a mile upstream. If we can build a simple forge, we can make steel." Sarah studied the map, her mind already working through the logistics. "What about the smoke? Won't their atmospheric sensors detect it?" "Not if we're smart about it," Maya replied. "The forest fires last summer left burn scars all over this area. There are still hot spots that create thermal signatures and occasional smoke plumes, natural camouflage." She moved to another map showing the local topography. "Plus, there's a natural depression here, surrounded by rock formations. The smoke would be channeled up through a narrow chimney that looks like just another rocky outcrop." Over the following days, the two women threw themselves into the work with desperate intensity. Sarah's military training proved invaluable as she calculated wind patterns and sight lines, while Maya's intimate knowledge of the forest guided their material gathering. They worked only during the hours when patrols were furthest away, moving like ghosts through terrain that Maya knew better than her own home. The first challenge was creating a forge capable of reaching the temperatures needed to work iron. Using a combination of clay from the creek bed and stones from an old fireplace, they built a primitive but functional furnace. Maya had learned basic metallurgy during her forestry education, knowledge that suddenly became precious beyond measure. Sarah contributed her understanding of weapons design, drawing on everything she had learned about ballistics and blade geometry during her military career. Their first attempts at creating steel were frustrating failures. The metal came out brittle and uneven, more suited for decoration than warfare. But with each attempt, they learned more about temperature control, timing, and the subtle art of working iron into steel. Sarah discovered that her steady hands and precise attention to detail, honed by years of maintaining military equipment, translated perfectly to the ancient craft of. The breakthrough came on their 5th day of work. Sarah pulled a glowing piece of metal from the forge and began hammering it on their improvised anvil, a large piece of railroad iron Maya had found near an abandoned logging camp. The rhythm was hypnotic. Heat, hammer, fold, heat again. Gradually, the crude piece of iron transformed into something else, a knife blade with clean lines and a sharp edge that gleamed like silver in the firelight. "It's beautiful," Maya whispered, watching as Sarah quenched the blade in a tub of creek water. Steam hissed up between them, and for a moment both women felt the pride of creation that had driven human innovation for thousands of years. But beauty wasn't the point. Sarah tested the edge against a piece of wood, then nodded with satisfaction as it sliced through the grain with minimal resistance. "This will cut through armor," she said confidently. "Their personal protection is designed to stop energy weapons and high-velocity projectiles. I don't think they've considered what happens when someone gets close with a sharp piece of steel." While Sarah perfected her metalworking skills, Maya turned her attention to other weapons that could be created from forest materials. Her park ranger training had included wilderness survival courses, and she knew how to make everything from snares to spears using only what nature provided. But she was adapting those techniques for warfare, creating weapons designed not just to wound, but to kill efficiently and quietly. The bow presented the greatest challenge. Modern compound bows relied on precision-engineered cams and carbon fiber limbs, technology they couldn't replicate. But Maya had studied traditional archery as a hobby, and she knew that skilled archers had been terrorizing armies with nothing more than carved wood and sinew. The key was finding the right type of wood and shaping it properly. After testing several different tree species, Maya settled on yew, the same wood that English had used to devastating effect at. There were several yew trees in the protected grove near the ranger station, some old enough to provide the dense, flexible heartwood needed for a proper war bow. She spent hours carefully selecting and cutting staves, then began the painstaking process of shaping them with hand tools. Sarah contributed to the project by creating arrowheads from the steel they were forging. Unlike the knife blades, these required a different approach. They needed to be light enough for flight but strong enough to penetrate armor. She experimented with different designs, eventually settling on a narrow bodkin point that could punch through metal plating by concentrating all its force on a tiny area. As their arsenal grew, so did their understanding of the tactical situation. Maya's continued reconnaissance had revealed more details about patrol patterns and behavior. The aliens seemed to operate on a strict schedule, following the same routes at the same times with mechanical precision. They relied heavily on their sensors and showed little interest in actually exploring the forest beyond their designated paths. "They're overconfident," Sarah observed as she studied Maya's sketches of alien patrol formations. "They think their technology makes them invulnerable, so they're not taking basic security precautions. No random route changes, no counter-surveillance, no adaptation to local conditions. They're fighting the last war, not this one." Maya nodded grimly. "I think they see us as a primitive species that got lucky with some advanced technology. Now that they've taken that technology away, they expect us to just give up." She held up one of Sarah's finished knife blades, testing its balance. "They're about to learn that humans don't give up. We adapt." By the end of their second week in the forest, their hidden armory contained a dozen steel knives, 4 functional bows with nearly 100 arrows, and an assortment of spears, clubs, and other close combat weapons. But more importantly, they had developed the skills and knowledge to make more. Sarah could now forge a knife blade in less than 2 hours, and Maya could craft a hunting bow that could drive an arrow completely through a 6-inch tree trunk. They had also begun to think beyond individual weapons to larger tactical considerations. The forest itself could be turned into a weapon with proper preparation. Maya knew every game trail, every natural, every place where an ambush could be set up with maximum effectiveness. Sarah's military training helped her envision how traditional guerrilla tactics could be adapted to fight an enemy with superior technology but inferior knowledge of the terrain. "We need to choose our battlefield carefully," Sarah said as they planned their first operation. Somewhere we can control the engagement, limit their mobility, and negate their technological advantages. Maya smiled, the expression fierce in the firelight from their forge. I know just the place. There's a narrow canyon about 3 miles from here where the main patrol route passes through. High walls on both sides, only one way in and one way out. If we position ourselves right, we can turn it into a killing field. Sarah looked at her growing collection of handmade weapons, each one representing hours of careful work and ancient knowledge passed down through generations of human warriors. They had made a crucial error in their assessment of humanity. They had seen the guns and missiles and assumed that was all humans knew about warfare. They were about to discover that the most dangerous weapon humanity possessed wasn't technology at all. It was the ability to adapt, to learn, and to fight with whatever tools were available. The aliens had confiscated every manufactured weapon on Earth, but they couldn't confiscate thousands of years of human ingenuity. The time for hiding was almost over. Soon, they would learn why Earth's forests had been the graveyard of armies for thousands of years. The canyon that Maya had chosen for their battlefield was a masterpiece of natural defensive positioning. Called Devil's Throat by the local hiking guides, it carved a narrow passage through granite walls that rose nearly 200 feet on either side. The main patrol route passed directly through its center, following what had once been a scenic hiking trail, but was now the most efficient path between two observation posts. Sarah crouched on the eastern rim, studying the passage below through a pair of binoculars Maya had salvaged from the ranger station. The canyon floor was perhaps 50 feet wide at its narrowest point, lined with large boulders that had fallen from the walls over countless centuries. Perfect cover for defenders, but a nightmare for anyone trying to move through quickly. The patrol comes through here every morning at 800 hours, Maya whispered, settling beside Sarah with her newly completed bow slung across her back. 4 soldiers in powered armor, moving in standard formation. They never deviate from the path, never send advance scouts, never check the high ground. Sarah nodded, still watching the canyon through her binoculars. Their arrogance is going to get them killed. In military doctrine, this is what we call a fatal funnel, where attackers become sitting ducks for defenders with superior position. They're walking into a textbook ambush scenario. Over the past 3 days, the 2 women had transformed Devil's Throat into a deadly trap. Using knowledge passed down from generations of human warfare, they had positioned their weapons and prepared their killing ground with meticulous care. Maya had used her forest skills to create concealed positions among the rocks and vegetation on both canyon rims, while Sarah had applied military engineering principles to create overlapping fields of fire. The most ingenious part of their plan involved exploiting this reliance on technology. Sarah had observed that the aliens used energy shields to deflect projectiles, but these shields were calibrated to stop high-velocity rounds and energy blasts. They had never been tested against traditional weapons moving at much lower speeds. A steel arrowhead traveling at 200 feet per second might pass right through defenses designed to stop bullets traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Remember, Sarah said quietly, checking her equipment one final time, we're not trying to win a stand-up fight. We hit hard, we hit fast, and then we disappear before reinforcements arrive. The goal is to prove that humans can still fight back and to gather intelligence on their equipment and tactics. Maya tested the draw weight on her bow, the yew wood creaking softly as she pulled the string to full extension. She had crafted this weapon with her own hands, shaping it with tools that were older than civilization itself. Each arrow in her quiver had been fletched with owl feathers and tipped with steel points forged in their hidden smithy. It felt good to hold a weapon again, to have some means of fighting back against the invaders who had destroyed her world. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed up from the canyon floor, followed by the distinctive hum of power armor. Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken as she settled into her firing position, but her hands remained steady. This was what she had trained for during her entire military career, the moment when planning and preparation met deadly reality. The first soldier appeared around the bend in the trail, his silver armor gleaming in the morning sunlight. He was followed by 3 others, all moving in the predictable formation that Sarah and Maya had observed for weeks. The aliens advanced with casual confidence, their sensors sweeping the canyon floor but never looking up at the rim where their enemies waited in perfect stillness. Sarah had positioned herself on the western rim, directly opposite Maya's position on the eastern wall. This gave them what military tacticians called crossing fields of fire the ability to attack from multiple angles simultaneously, making it impossible for the enemy to take cover from both positions at once. It was a technique that had been used successfully by everyone from Roman legions to Apache warriors. When the patrol reached the narrowest part of the canyon, Sarah raised her hand in the signal they had agreed upon. Maya drew her bow to full extension, the steel arrowhead gleaming like a silver needle in the sunlight. For a heartbeat, both women held their positions, feeling the weight of the moment. Then Sarah dropped her hand, and the attack began. Maya's first arrow took the lead in the neck, slipping through a gap in his armor where the helmet met the chest plate. The alien went down immediately, his energy weapon clattering across the stone floor of the canyon. Sarah followed instantly with her own shot, driving a steel-tipped arrow deep into the second alien's thigh, piercing the armor joint and dropping him to one knee. The remaining two reacted with trained efficiency, their energy shields snapping to life as they sought cover behind the nearest boulder. But their defenses had been calibrated for a different kind of warfare. Sarah's next arrow punched through the energy barrier as if it didn't exist, embedding itself in the alien's shoulder and spinning him around. Maya had already knocked her second arrow and was drawing for another shot when the fourth finally located her position on the rim. His energy weapon swung toward her, the barrel beginning to glow with contained power. But he was too late. Maya's arrow caught him center mass, the steel point sliding between armor plates and finding the soft tissue beneath. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. 4 soldiers lay dead or dying on the canyon floor, their advanced weapons and armor proving useless against tactics that were thousands of years old. Sarah felt no satisfaction in the killing, only grim determination and the cold professionalism that came from successful completion of a military operation. "Move," Sarah called softly across the canyon. "Reinforcements will be here in minutes." But before they retreated, both women rappelled down into the canyon to examine their handiwork and gather intelligence. The armor was more sophisticated than anything Sarah had seen during her military career, but it was also surprisingly specialized. The energy shields that made these soldiers nearly invulnerable to modern weapons had massive blind spots when it came to traditional projectiles. Maya quickly gathered one of the fallen energy weapons, wrapping it in a canvas bag to shield it from the aliens' tracking systems. Sarah focused on the armor itself, noting weak points and design features that might be exploited in future engagements. The aliens had clearly never considered the possibility that their enemies might revert to pre-gunpowder weapons. "Their communications equipment is still active," Maya observed, pointing to a device on one of the fallen soldiers' belts. "They're probably transmitting location and status data back to their command post." Sarah nodded grimly, "Which means we have maybe 10 minutes before this place is crawling with search teams." She took one last look around the canyon, memorizing details that might be important later. "Let's go." They climbed back to the rim using ropes and climbing gear that Maya had salvaged from the ranger station, then quickly gathered their weapons and equipment. The retreat route had been carefully planned and rehearsed, following game trails and creek beds that would be difficult for vehicles to navigate. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the forest like ghosts, leaving behind only the evidence of their deadly work. As they made their way back toward the ranger station, Sarah found herself analyzing the tactical implications of what they had accomplished. The engagement had proved several crucial points. Technology was vulnerable to traditional weapons, their tactical doctrine was inflexible and predictable, and they could be killed by humans using primitive but effective methods. More importantly, they had proven that resistance was possible. The aliens' greatest weapon had been the sense of hopelessness they created when they confiscated humanity's modern weapons. By demonstrating that humans could still fight back effectively with traditional tools, Sarah and Maya had struck a blow against something more valuable than any military target. They had challenged the myth of invincibility. "This is just the beginning," Sarah said as they reached the safety of the deep forest. "Word will spread about what happened here. Other survivors will realize that they don't need advanced weapons to fight back. They just need the will to adapt and the knowledge to use what nature provides." Maya nodded, her bow still strung and ready for action. "The aliens think they've disarmed us, but they've really just forced us to remember who we were before we had guns and missiles. They've awakened something that's been sleeping in human DNA for thousands of years." Behind them, the sound of aircraft filled the morning air as search teams descended on Devil's Throat. But the canyon would tell them nothing except that their soldiers were dead and that humans were far from defeated. The resistance had begun, and it would spread through the forests like wildfire, carried by survivors who understood that the oldest weapons were often the deadliest. They had made a fatal error in their conquest strategy. They had assumed that by taking away humanity's technology, they could reduce humans to helpless primitives. Instead, they had transformed them into something far more dangerous, warriors who fought with the accumulated knowledge of the response to the canyon ambush was swift and overwhelming. Within hours of discovering their fallen patrol, alien aircraft filled the sky above the Pacific Northwest, their sensors sweeping the forest in search of the human resistance fighters. Sarah watched from a concealed observation post as military-grade hover tanks moved along the main roads, their energy weapons cutting down entire groves of trees to eliminate potential hiding places. "They're angry," Maya observed, studying the alien search patterns through a salvaged pair of binoculars. "And angry enemies make mistakes." Sarah nodded, but she also understood the tactical reality they now faced. The successful ambush at Devil's Throat had proven that humans could fight back, but it had also revealed their location to an enemy with vastly superior numbers and technology. Every soldier in the region would now be hunting for them specifically, and their hiding place in the forest would only remain secure for so long. But word of the ambush had already begun to spread through the scattered human survivors. Maya's emergency radio, tuned to frequencies that the Park Service had used for wilderness communications, crackled with coded messages from other groups. 3 separate survivor camps had made contact, each reporting small-scale attacks against patrols using improvised weapons. The resistance was growing. "We need to think bigger," Sarah said as she studied the tactical maps spread across the floor of the ranger station. "Individual ambushes are fine for proving a point, but if we're going to make a real difference, we need to coordinate multiple groups and create sustained pressure across a wide area." The breakthrough came when a new voice appeared on the radio frequencies. Doctor, a metallurgist from the University of Washington who had been trapped behind enemy lines when Seattle fell. She had managed to establish contact with survivor groups across 3 states, and more importantly, she had been analyzing captured technology with the help of other scientists who had gone underground. "Their power systems are more vulnerable than they appear," Doctor reported during a coded transmission. "The energy weapons and armor systems all rely on a centralized power core that can be disrupted by electromagnetic pulses, not the kind that require nuclear weapons, simple induction coils created with salvaged copper wire." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she absorbed this information. Electromagnetic pulse weapons had been theoretical concepts during her military training, but the basic principles were sound. If they could build devices capable of disrupting power systems, it would level the playing field dramatically. Maya had been listening to the transmission with growing excitement. "There's an abandoned mining operation about 20 miles north of here," she said. "Copper mine that was shut down in the 1980s. There should be plenty of raw material there, plus industrial equipment we could adapt." Over the following week, Sarah and Maya expanded their operation beyond simple weapon making into something approaching an underground factory. Using Maya's intimate knowledge of the regional geography, they identified and contacted 12 separate survivor groups, each contributing specialized knowledge and skills to the growing resistance network. The copper mine proved to be a treasure trove of materials and equipment. Dr. Martinez, an electrical engineer who had joined their group after escaping from a detention center, worked with Sarah to design pulse generators using principles he had learned from studying electromagnetic warfare systems. The devices they created were crude but functional, essentially large induction coils powered by hand-cranked generators that could produce focused electromagnetic pulses strong enough to disrupt alien electronics. Meanwhile, Maya had recruited 2 former Army Rangers who had been working as hunting guides when the invasion began. Together, they began training other survivors in the ancient arts of fieldcraft and guerrilla warfare. The group learned how to move through the forest without leaving traces, how to set up ambushes that could be abandoned quickly, and how to coordinate attacks across multiple locations simultaneously. The first coordinated strike came 3 weeks after the Devil's Throat ambush. 6 separate teams hit positions across a 100-mile front, using a combination of traditional weapons and the new electromagnetic pulse devices. The aliens' response was chaotic and uncoordinated, Their command and control systems had been designed for fighting conventional human military forces, not distributed guerrilla networks that appeared and disappeared like smoke. At the abandoned lumber mill that served as Sarah's primary target, the attack unfolded with devastating efficiency. Her team used the pulse generators to disable the aliens' energy weapons and communications equipment, then closed in with steel blades and arrows to finish the job. The soldiers, stripped of their technological advantages, proved to be surprisingly vulnerable in close combat. But the real victory came from analyzing the equipment they captured during these raids. Doctor had established a hidden laboratory in an abandoned mine shaft, where she and her team of scientists worked to reverse engineer alien technology using tools and methods that would have been familiar to blacksmiths and clockmakers from previous centuries. Their technology is incredibly sophisticated, Doctor explained during a secure radio transmission, but it's also highly specialized. They've optimized everything for efficiency and integration with their existing systems. That makes it powerful but also brittle. When you disrupt one component, the entire system can cascade into failure. This insight led to the development of what became known as harmony weapons devices that combined traditional human craftsmanship with adapted alien technology. Sarah learned to forge steel blades that incorporated salvaged alien metals, creating weapons that were sharper and stronger than anything pure human metallurgy could produce. Maya developed arrows with electromagnetic pulse tips that could disable alien electronics before the steel points penetrated armor. The psychological impact of the resistance campaign was as important as its tactical success. Patrols became increasingly cautious and defensive, abandoning their previous arrogance in favor of heavy security protocols that slowed their operations significantly. More importantly, human survivors across the region began to emerge from hiding, motivated by proof that the aliens could be fought and defeated. Sarah found herself evolving from a lone survivor into the leader of a growing military organization. Her experience with conventional warfare proved invaluable in coordinating between different resistance cells, while her growing expertise with traditional weapons made her a teacher as well as a commander. She established training camps deep in the forest where survivors learned everything from basic knife fighting to complex ambush tactics. The commanders eventually realized that they were facing something unprecedented in their experience, a human resistance movement that had deliberately reverted to pre-industrial warfare methods, specifically to exploit weaknesses in advanced military technology. Their response was to escalate the conflict, bringing in heavier weapons and more sophisticated tracking systems. But each escalation only validated the resistance strategy. The more technology the aliens deployed, the more opportunities they created for electromagnetic pulse attacks and traditional sabotage methods. Their heavy hover tanks were vulnerable to pit traps and improvised explosives made from mining charges. Their sophisticated aircraft could be brought down by carefully placed arrows that targeted critical systems. The tipping point came when Sarah's forces captured an intact command vehicle, complete with its communication systems and tactical computers. Doctor's team worked around the clock to decode the alien command protocols, eventually gaining access to their strategic planning databases. What they discovered changed everything. The occupation force was much smaller than anyone had realized, only a few thousand soldiers responsible for controlling the entire Pacific Northwest. They had relied on psychological warfare and technological superiority to maintain control, but those advantages were rapidly eroding as the human resistance demonstrated that superior technology didn't guarantee victory. "We're not fighting for survival anymore," Sarah told the assembled resistance leaders during their first major coordination meeting. "We're fighting to win. The aliens have revealed their true weakness. They can't adapt to changing conditions. They're still trying to fight the war they planned for, not the war we're actually fighting." Maya smiled as she tested the draw on a new bow she had crafted, this one incorporating alien materials that made it nearly unbreakable and capable of driving arrows through solid steel. "They thought they could defeat us by taking away our guns and missiles," she said. "Instead, they forced us to remember that humans have been warriors since long before we ever invented gunpowder. They awakened something in us that's older and more dangerous than any technology." The forest around them hummed with activity as dozens of resistance fighters prepared weapons and planned operations. What had begun as two desperate survivors making knives and arrows in Hidden Forge had evolved into a sophisticated military campaign that was systematically dismantling the alien occupation. They had made the ultimate strategic error. They had underestimated the final assault on the command center began before dawn, when the alien sensors were least effective, and their guard rotations were at their most predictable. Sarah crouched at the edge of the forest, watching the massive crystalline structure that had been built where the city of Portland once stood. The command center rose like a gleaming spear from the ruins, its alien geometry both beautiful and terrifying in the pre-dawn darkness. Behind her, nearly 300 human fighters waited in perfect silence, armed with weapons that spanned the entire history of human warfare. Some carried steel swords forged in hidden smithies deep in the forest. Others bore electromagnetic pulse devices built from salvaged copper and alien technology. Maya led a company of archers whose U-bows could drive steel-tipped arrows through armor at 200 yards. All of them had learned to fight using techniques that the aliens had never encountered and couldn't defend against. The past 2 months had transformed the resistance from a scattered collection of survivors into a sophisticated military force. Scientific teams had not only decoded communication protocols, but had also learned to manufacture hybrid weapons that combined human craftsmanship with alien materials. The electromagnetic pulse devices had evolved into portable cannons capable of disabling entire sections of alien equipment simultaneously. More importantly, the resistance had proven that traditional warfare tactics could be devastatingly effective against an enemy that relied too heavily on technology. They had lost over 60% of their occupation force to attacks that their sensors couldn't detect and their doctrine couldn't counter. Their remaining commanders had been forced to withdraw into heavily fortified positions, abandoning most of their territorial control. "All teams report ready," whispered Dr. Martinez, who had become Sarah's communications specialist. His modified radio equipment could operate on frequencies that the monitoring systems ignored, treating them as natural background noise rather than organized military communications. Sarah nodded, then raised her hand in the signal that would begin the final phase of their campaign. Across the ruined cityscape, 12 separate strike teams moved into position, each targeting a specific weakness in the command center's defenses that they had identified through weeks of careful reconnaissance. The first attack came from Maya's archers, positioned on the rooftops of destroyed buildings surrounding the alien structure. Their steel-tipped arrows found the external sensor arrays that they used for perimeter security, disabling the sophisticated detection systems with precisely placed shots. The aliens inside the command center suddenly found themselves blind to everything happening beyond their immediate walls. As the sensor grid went dark, Sarah led her assault team in a direct charge toward the main entrance. The electromagnetic pulse cannons opened fire simultaneously, their focused energy bursts overloading the aliens' defensive systems and creating gaps in their energy barriers. They had never encountered weapons that attacked their technology rather than their personnel, and their response protocols were completely inadequate. The steel weapons that Sarah's forces carried proved their worth in the close quarters fighting that followed. Energy weapons were designed for long-range combat against enemies with similar technology. In the narrow corridors of their own command center, the aliens found themselves facing opponents who fought with blades and arrows at distances where their advanced weapons became liabilities rather than advantages. Sarah's knife, the first weapon she had forged in the hidden smithy weeks ago, sliced through alien armor as if it were cloth. The soldier she faced tried to bring his energy rifle to bear, but the corridor was too narrow and Sarah was too close. Her blade found the gap between his helmet and chest plate, and another invader joined his fallen comrades. Throughout the command center, similar scenes played out as human fighters demonstrated the deadly effectiveness of traditional weapons in confined spaces. The aliens' technological superiority meant nothing when faced with opponents who could close to hand-to-hand range and fight with weapons specifically designed for that purpose. But the real breakthrough came when Doctor's team reached the central control room. The command systems were incredibly sophisticated, but they were also completely dependent on the crystalline computer cores that managed every aspect of their technology. When Maya's specialized arrows, tipped with electromagnetic pulse generators, struck these cores, the entire alien infrastructure began to collapse. "Their whole system is interconnected," Doctor reported over the radio as alien technology sparked and failed around her. Take out the central processing units and everything else goes down with them. Their efficiency is their weakness. Across the Pacific Northwest, equipment simply stopped working. Hover tanks fell from the sky as their anti-gravity systems failed. Energy weapons powered down and refused to restart. Communication networks went silent. The aliens' technological civilization, which had seemed so invincible just months ago, revealed itself to be as fragile as any other when its foundation was destroyed. The surviving forces found themselves stranded on an alien world, cut off from their home civilization, and facing human opponents who had adapted their warfare to exploit every weakness in advanced technology. Some attempted to surrender, offering to share their scientific knowledge in exchange for safe passage off Earth. Others tried to establish new defensive positions using only basic equipment that couldn't be disrupted by electromagnetic pulse attacks. But the war was effectively over. The psychological impact of the command center's fall spread through human survivor communities worldwide, inspiring similar resistance movements on every continent. They had revealed that their conquest was dependent on maintaining the illusion of technological invincibility. Once that illusion was shattered, their entire occupation strategy collapsed. Sarah stood in the ruins of the alien command center, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and gold above the liberated city. Her clothes were torn and blood-stained, her homemade knife was notched from combat, and her body ached from the night's fighting. But she felt something she hadn't experienced since the invasion began: hope for humanity's future. Maya appeared beside her, her bow unstrung now that the fighting was over. "It's hard to believe it's finished," she said quietly. "When they first arrived, everyone thought their technology made them unbeatable." "Technology is just a tool," Sarah replied, cleaning the blade of her knife on a piece of cloth. "They forgot that the most important factor in any war isn't the sophistication of your weapons, it's the adaptability and determination of the people who wield them. They brought superior tools to the fight, but we brought superior warriors." Around them, human fighters were already beginning the work of rebuilding. Dr. Martinez and his team worked to restore communication networks using hybrid technology that combined human engineering with salvaged alien components. Other groups focused on medical aid for the wounded and organizing food distribution for the civilian population that was emerging from hiding. The resistance had evolved far beyond its origins as a desperate survival strategy. It had become a demonstration of humanity's greatest strength: the ability to adapt, learn, and overcome any challenge through determination and ingenuity. The weapons they had forged in hidden smithies would be remembered not just as tools of war, but as symbols of human refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. "What happens now?" Maya asked, looking out over the city that was slowly coming back to life. Sarah smiled, sliding her knife back into the leather sheath she had crafted to carry it. "Now we teach the galaxy what humans are really capable of when you push us too far. The thought they could conquer us by taking away our advanced weapons. Instead, they forced us to rediscover the warrior skills that made us successful on this planet for thousands of years before we ever reached for the stars." The forest that had sheltered their resistance would always hold a special place in their memory. It had been their fortress, their factory, and their school all at once. But more than that, it had been the place where humanity remembered its true nature, not as a species dependent on technology for survival, but as adaptable, resourceful fighters who could thrive under any conditions. They had confiscated every weapon, thinking that would end human resistance. Instead, they had discovered that the most dangerous weapon humanity possessed couldn't be confiscated at all. It was the willingness to learn, adapt, and fight with whatever tools were available. It was the knowledge that had been passed down through generations of human warriors, from the first hunters who learned to make fire to the soldiers who had defended their homes with nothing but courage and sharp steel. As the sun climbed higher over the liberated city, Sarah knew that word of humanity's victory would spread to every corner of the galaxy. Other species would learn that humans were not just another primitive race that had stumbled onto advanced technology. They were survivors who had earned their place among the stars through 10,000 years of adaptation, innovation, and refusal to surrender. The age of human expansion into the galaxy was about to begin, and it would be built on the foundation of lessons learned in Earth's forests with weapons forged by hand in hidden smithies. They had wanted to teach humanity about the futility of resistance. Instead, they had provided the galaxy with its first glimpse of what humans could accomplish when their survival was truly threatened. The resistance was over, The real war was just beginning. Enemy, they were about to learn that the most dangerous opponents are those who have nothing left to lose and everything still to fight for. End conflict in history. D as civilization itself.